He's outside walking around with a gun. We have an order of protection against him, and I'm pretty sure he's looking for my daughter because my niece lives in those apartments.
How do you know this person, ma'am?
It's my ex-husband. It's my daughter's husband, estranged husband. He just got out of jail like last week. James Leggett. Are they 7 people? Yeah, but they have to ask you how this.
What is he wearing right now?
We didn't see him, so I'm not sure what he's wearing. He's outside, and I told my niece not to go back out there.
All right, how did you know that he has a gun?
Yeah, he's 6'6". He's a black guy, brown skin, low cut hair. Not low, but it's a little bit of hair. Yeah, he's really tall.
All right, how did you know that he has a gun?
Because they seen him. He's been posting on Facebook, and he's not even supposed to contact my daughter, but he's been sending her crazy messages since 9 o'clock this morning.
So you're not sure that he's outside? Because you haven't seen him, right?
Oh, yes, I'm sure he's outside with a gun.
But did you saw him with a gun?
My niece did. I'm headed over here now, but I'm kind of scared to go.
What's the name of the apartment?
He's seen him outside with the gun.
911, what is the location of your emergency?
He's here. 608 in the court. As they pulled off, he walks up and he's beating on the door now. And he has a gun. An order of protection. They already verified it.
Has he ever tried to strangle or choke you in the past?
Yeah, I have an order of protection from him beating her up.
Can you just send somebody?
I have to ask these questions for police safety, okay?
The night air in Nashville felt strangely still. One of those quiet, uneasy evenings where the wind seems to hold its breath, as if it already knows something terrible is about to happen. Streetlights hummed softly over the apartment complex on Lebanon Pike, casting long, pale streaks of light across the parking lot. A young woman moved quickly across that lot, checking over her shoulder the way someone does when fear has become muscle memory. Her name was Michaela Carter, 24 years old, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. A woman who had followed every rule the system set out for her. A woman who was doing everything right. Inside her apartment, she tried to calm the tremor in her hands as she locked the door, sliding the deadbolt into place with the careful precision of someone who no longer trusted the world to stay outside. She checked each window again, making sure they were latched. Her phone stayed at arm's reach. She had already called the police earlier that week. She had already spoken to victims' advocates. She already had the protective order. A piece of paper she held onto like a lifeline, even though she knew, deep down, that paper can't stop a man determined to kill. But she still believed in the idea of protection. Or at least she desperately wanted to. What she didn't know, what no one warned her about, was that her estranged husband, a man who had threatened her life more than once, had been watching her, waiting, calculating, and that the gun he held in his hands now was the same one he once pointed at his own mother. A gun he should never have had access to. A gun officers were told about. A gun the system knew existed. Minutes from now, the silence would shatter. And with it, the fragile hope Michaela still held.
This is Cold Case Chronicles True Crime, where every silence hides a secret, and every story deserves to be heard. We uncover the mysteries buried in time, the victims, the motives, the truths long forgotten. Subscribe now and join us as we dive into the world's darkest cases, because every smile hides a story, and every mystery deserves a voice.
Before we continue, if you're watching this and you or someone you know is experiencing domestic violence, please know you're not alone. Help is available. In the United States, you can contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Your safety matters. Michaela's story begins long before that night. A story shaped by resilience, by love, by her fierce determination to build a life beyond the chaos she grew up around. Friends describe her as a lighthearted girl with a contagious laugh, someone who could walk into a room and immediately make you feel like she'd known you for years. She was creative, compassionate, often putting others before herself. She had dreams, small ones and big ones. She talked about traveling one day, starting a small business, raising her children to know stability and kindness. But like so many young women across the country, Michaela crossed paths with someone who saw her gentle nature as something to exploit instead of protect. A man who, on the surface, presented himself as charming, affectionate, protective. And in the beginning, he was exactly that. He knew how to say all the right words, how to appear vulnerable in ways that made Michaela feel needed. He fit the script almost perfectly. The kind of man who becomes who you want him to be until the moment he no longer cares to pretend. Their relationship moved fast. Too fast, some of her family members later said. There were red flags early on, but they were subtle at first. Little bursts of jealousy, sudden mood swings, comments that seemed controlling but were framed as love. He would apologize immediately afterward, promising he only acted that way because he cared too much. It's a phrase many victims hear long before the violence starts, a phrase designed to soften the edges of danger. Over time, those edges sharpened. What began as jealousy became monitoring, checking her messages, asking where she was every minute, questioning who she spoke to and why. Then came the accusations, the yelling, the slamming doors. Then came the threats. There's a progression domestic violence advocates know all too well. Escalation isn't a possibility. It's a pattern, a predictable one, as consistent as gravity. Michaela tried to leave more than once. Most survivors do before they finally break away for good. Each time, he would pull her back with tears, with promises, with pleas. And each time, Michaela believed him. Or maybe she didn't. Maybe she simply hoped the man he pretended to be would return and stay. But fear has a way of revealing the truth more clearly than love ever can. The first time he put his hands on her, Michaela froze. Victims often describe that moment the same way. A splitting of reality. Shock, confusion, shame. She didn't call police immediately. She tried to rationalize it. He was stressed. He didn't mean it. It was an accident. The kinds of phrases survivors repeat not because they're true, but because the alternative is admitting they're in danger from someone they trusted. But the violence didn't stop. It escalated. There were times he brandished a gun in the middle of arguments. A gun officers would later learn he had also used to threaten his own mother. There were nights Michaela hid her children in the bedroom just to keep them from hearing the screaming. There were mornings she went to work with makeup layered carefully over bruises she didn't want to explain. Eventually, fear became impossible to ignore. She realized she wasn't just trying to survive for herself anymore. She was trying to survive for her children. And that's when she finally made the decision. She left. She filed for a restraining order, standing in front of a judge and describing incidents she had once kept secret, repeating threats she hoped she'd never have to say out loud. She spoke about the gun. She spoke about the fear. She spoke about the nights she didn't sleep. And the court granted her what Tennessee law calls an order of protection, legally defined under Tennessee Code Annotated Section 36-3-606. A protection order prohibits an abuser from contacting, stalking, harassing, threatening, or physically harming the victim. It also empowers law enforcement to remove weapons, order the abuser to vacate shared property, and arrest them on the spot if they violate the order. For thousands of victims across the state, this statute is a lifeline. But for Michaela, it became something far more fragile. A thin barrier between her and a man who had already proven he didn't fear consequences. Still, she tried. She followed every instruction given to her. She gave police the details they needed. She explained the threats. She handed over documentation. She moved to an apartment where she thought she'd be safer. But what happens when the people responsible for upholding that protection don't take those threats seriously? What happens when he won't actually do anything becomes the refrain victims hear until the moment everything collapses. In the days leading up to her murder, Michaela reached out for help more than once. She called officers multiple times reporting that her estranged husband had violated the order. She told them he had been circling her apartment complex. She said she felt watched. She said she felt unsafe. She said she was scared he was going to kill her. Witnesses later recalled her saying, "I don't think he's going to stop this time." It was a sentence that should have set off alarm bells. a sentence that should have triggered an immediate response. Under Tennessee statute, violating an order of protection is a criminal offense, punishable by up to 10 months in jail on the first offense, and a mandatory arrest requirement if officers have probable cause to believe the violation occurred. But instead of enforcing it, officers told her there wasn't much they could do unless he physically hurt her again. It is a failure so many victims encounter. A misunderstanding of domestic violence law, a misinterpretation of what imminent danger looks like, or a simple underestimation of a woman's fear. The system was built to protect. But Michaela was discovering the truth many victims face. Protection only works when the people responsible for enforcing it believe your fear is real. Meanwhile, her estranged husband had spiraled further into jealousy and rage. The more distance she created, the more violent his behavior became. In domestic violence psychology, this is known as separation violence, the most dangerous time for a victim. Leaving doesn't calm an abuser. It destabilizes them, and instability becomes a catalyst for fatal decisions. In his mind, Michaela's independence wasn't liberation, it was betrayal, and he wanted control back, even if regaining it meant killing her. On the night of the murder, he drove to her apartment complex with purpose. Not in a moment of passion, not in a drunken outburst. This was premeditation. He brought the same firearm he'd threatened his mother with. He walked the same paths Michaela had walked earlier. He watched her door. He waited. Inside her apartment, Michaela paced the living room with a sense of dread she couldn't shake. She texted a friend that she had a bad feeling. She checked the lock again. She told herself she was safe because she had done everything right. But danger doesn't care about paperwork. It was close to midnight when she heard the first noise. Something small, something out of place, something that made the hair on the back of her neck rise. Then another, then footsteps. She moved toward the door slowly, listening, trying to convince herself her mind was just playing tricks on her. She dialed 911. But before she could explain her fear, before she could even form the words, the door burst open. He stepped inside with the gun already raised. Her last moments were filled with terror the system promised she would never have to face again. And then, gunfire. Neighbors would later say the sound was so loud it echoed through the concrete walls, jolting them awake. Several called 911 immediately. Some ran into the hallway. Others pulled their children close, unsure of what was happening but knowing instinctively that something horrific had occurred. When officers arrived, Michaela's body was on the floor inside her apartment. She had been shot multiple times. The gunman had already fled. Her neighbors cried. Her friends collapsed when they heard. Her family's world ended in a single night. Michaela Carter did everything right. And still, she died alone in the place she should have been safest. The blue and red lights bled across the exterior walls of Michaela's apartment complex, painting the night in a pulse of color that felt heartbreakingly out of place. Officers moved through the scene with a tense urgency, their radios crackling with overlapping voices as they tried to lock down the area. The gunman had vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only the shell casings that glinted faintly on the floor and the stillness of a life violently taken. Inside the apartment, detectives stepped carefully around Michaela's body, documenting the position she fell in, the direction of the blood spatter, the trajectory of the bullets. Each detail would become a piece of a larger story, the story of a murder that should never have happened. Crime scene technicians photographed everything, from the overturned chair near the doorway to the dent in the wall where a bullet had struck. The silence inside the apartment was suffocating, interrupted only by the soft shutter sound of the camera and the distant murmur of radios. One detective crouched near the threshold, studying the shattered doorframe. It was clear the killer forced his way in. The wood had splintered outward, shards scattered across the entryway. This wasn't a calm confrontation. It was an ambush, a targeted attack. The kind carried out by someone who made up his mind long before he ever stepped foot on that property. Paramedics, who arrived moments after the first officers, couldn't do anything but confirm what was already evident. Michaela had no pulse, no breath, no chance of revival. Her wounds were severe, multiple gunshot injuries, clustered in a pattern that suggested the shooter didn't hesitate. He fired with intent, with focus, and with the kind of cold resolve that leaves no room for remorse. Outside, neighbors gathered behind yellow tape, their faces illuminated by streetlights and emergency sirens. Some held blankets around their shoulders. Others held each other. A few whispered prayers. Many were in shock. They had seen Michaela walking her kids to the car, carrying groceries, smiling as she chatted with neighbors. She was young, kind, polite, never caused trouble, and now she was gone. One neighbor told police. She said she was scared. She said he was watching her. Why didn't anyone help her? The officer taking her statement paused, unsure how to respond, because the truth was there in her voice. A question that would hang over this case long after the crime scene tape came down. Detectives immediately launched a search for the estranged husband, whose name became the primary focus of every radio call. Patrol units spread across the surrounding neighborhoods. Nearby hospitals were checked in case he'd injured himself. Highways were monitored. Relatives' addresses were flagged. Technology came into play, license plate readers, phone ping requests, vehicle alerts. They needed to find him before he disappeared completely or, worse, harmed someone else. Back at the crime scene, forensic technicians collected the shell casings, each one meticulously labeled and bagged. The caliber of the rounds matched the description of the gun Michaela had told police about. The same firearm she mentioned in her protection order request, the one her estranged husband had previously brandished during arguments. Under Tennessee law, once a protection order is in place, the respondent is required to surrender all firearms. But enforcement varies. And in Michaela's case, the follow-up never happened. As her friends would later say, the gun was reported. They just didn't take it. The medical examiner arrived shortly after. With quiet, respectful precision, she examined Michaela's injuries. Gunshot wounds to the chest, one to the shoulder, another lower, near the abdomen. The pattern suggested he continued firing even after she fell. Under forensic pathology standards, the ME would later determine the official cause of death to be multiple gunshot wounds, with the manner of death classified as homicide. Toxicology screens would show nothing unusual. Michaela had been sober, alert, aware. She had done everything within her power to protect herself. Meanwhile, police continued the search. Hours passed. Sunrise edged into the sky, washing the streets in a soft, gray light that made the scene feel even more unreal. Detectives regrouped at headquarters to coordinate. They reviewed prior calls. They pulled incident reports. And what they found was devastating. Michaela had contacted law enforcement multiple times in the days before her murder, reporting that her estranged husband had violated the protection order. This wasn't a single oversight. It was a pattern of dismissal. One dispatcher log showed her saying, "He's outside. I know he's going to do something." Another entry described her crying, begging for someone to come because she felt unsafe. But each time, the response was slow or minimal. Officers never arrested him, never seized the gun, never followed up with the level of urgency a violation requires under Tennessee law. As the investigation continued, detectives interviewed Michaela's family. Conversations filled with tears, disbelief, and the kind of grief that breaks something inside the room. They spoke about the abuse, the threats, the times Michaela had tried to leave before. One relative said, "She told us, if anything happens to me, it's him." She said it. She knew. In domestic violence cases, statements like that carry significant weight. They become part of the evidence, a window into the victim's fear, a reflection of what was coming long before the final act of violence occurred. By mid-afternoon, a breakthrough emerged. Officers located the estranged husband's vehicle abandoned near a wooded area on the outskirts of the city. The engine was cold, the doors locked. There were no signs of forced entry or struggle. It appeared he had parked the car deliberately and then fled on foot. The location triggered immediate concern. Dense woods, multiple access points, and enough cover to easily hide someone who didn't want to be found. The search expanded into a manhunt. K-9 units scoured the tree line. Officers formed search grids. Helicopters circled the area with thermal imaging, scanning for movement beneath the canopy. Every minute mattered. Every minute increased the likelihood he could escape the area or take another life. As officers moved through the wooded terrain, the story of Michaela's final days became clearer, more devastating, more enraging. Her estranged husband had been stalking her relentlessly. He had violated the protection order repeatedly. He had threatened her more than once, and every warning she gave was met with hesitation instead of intervention. Tennessee law is explicit. A violation of a protection order requires mandatory arrest if officers have probable cause. Probable cause can come from a statement from the victim, witness observations, physical evidence, or the officer's own assessment of danger. Michaela provided all of that, and still nothing was done. Her death was not an unpredictable tragedy. It was a preventable one. While officers searched for the suspect, Michaela's family gathered at a relative's home, clinging to each other in shock.
Michaela Carter and her cousin Janicia Bell grew up together and were extremely close. Janicia says Michaela and James Leggett were together for around 10 years.
But I never knew the extent of it until a year ago when she reached out to me wanting to come live with me because she was trying to get away from him. And even then, she just confided in me about some things, and I just was shocked because I knew he wasn't good for her, but I didn't know he treated her that badly.
Metro Police say Leggett shot Michaela in the chest and leg. A week later, she died from her injuries. Michaela had a protective order against Leggett.
I was just distraught. I mean, I just couldn't believe it. You know, she's my baby cousin. You know, she has so much life to live.
But back in July, TBI records show Leggett had been charged with assault, domestic bodily injury, and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Those records show he has an extensive criminal background.
How did he manage to get back out of jail? If you go look at this man's record, he has over 20-something charges.
I asked the district attorney's office why Leggett was allowed to be walking the streets. A spokesperson says Leggett was held in custody for a probation violation from the summer up until a week before the attack. The DA's office says the victim was also not willing to testify, something victim rights advocates say is common.
I mean, we just need to be wiser as a system of how we handle order protections and how we are going to truly protect the victims, as well as provide some intervention for the individual who is causing this mayhem.
Her mother sat quietly at the kitchen table, staring at a photograph of her daughter. Her voice broke as she whispered. She asked for help. She wasn't asking for anything unreasonable. She just wanted to live. Domestic violence advocates in Nashville began speaking out almost immediately. They pointed to a statistic they knew all too well, that the most dangerous time for a domestic violence victim is the period immediately after leaving. According to national data, the risk of homicide increases by up to 75% in the weeks following separation. It's a moment when victims are often most vulnerable, and when abusers often feel the most threatened. Yet despite this well-documented danger, enforcement gaps continue to claim lives. As daylight began to fade, officers finally located the estranged husband, hiding in a vacant shed several miles from where his car was found. He was armed, disoriented, sweating heavily. When confronted, he initially refused to surrender, pacing inside the shed with the gun still in his hand. Tactical units were called in. Negotiators attempted to reason with him, urging him to put the weapon down, to step outside, to resolve things without further violence. He refused. For nearly an hour, law enforcement surrounded the shed, creating a perimeter and preparing for every possible outcome. They knew they were dealing with a volatile individual, someone who had already killed once, who had a history of threatening violence, and who now seemed trapped between guilt and desperation. Eventually, after a tense standoff, he emerged. The gun was still at his side, but his posture had shifted. His shoulders slumped. His voice cracked as he muttered something officers couldn't fully hear. And then, slowly, he dropped the weapon onto the ground. The arrest was swift. Officers moved in, restrained him, and escorted him out of the clearing. His face was blank, a hollow expression, as if the reality of what he had done was only beginning to settle in. But for Michaela's family, the arrest brought no relief, no sense of justice, only the confirmation of what they already knew, that the man she had tried to escape, the man she had feared with every part of her being, had made good on the threats she reported over and over again. As detectives transported him to the station, the weight of the case hung in the air like humidity. This wasn't just a murder. It was an indictment of the very system designed to prevent it. A system that had all the information it needed, all the warnings, all the opportunities to intervene. And still, Michaela was gone. At the Metro Nashville Police Department, detectives walked the estranged husband into an interview room. A small, windowless space lit by a single fluorescent bulb that cast harsh shadows across the table. His wrists were cuffed, his face expressionless. But beneath that blank exterior, there was a flicker of something dark and hollow, the kind of emptiness that follows an irreversible act. Detectives began the interview, their voices steady but firm. They read him his rights. They asked about the weapon. They asked about the argument. They asked why he drove to Michaela's apartment that night. At first, he denied everything. Claimed he didn't remember. Claimed he blacked out. Claimed he only wanted to talk. But the evidence said otherwise. Ballistics testing would later confirm that the shell casings recovered from the apartment matched the handgun he surrendered at the shed. Gunshot residue clung to the sleeves of his jacket. His phone showed searches that prosecutors would later argue proved intent, queries about protection orders, custody laws, and the consequences of violating them. Location data placed him near Michaela's apartment multiple times in the days before the murder, even when he wasn't supposed to be anywhere near her. Soon, his denials gave way to the kind of half-truths common in domestic homicide cases. Statements meant to soften guilt, to reframe control as emotion, to recast premeditation as impulse. But the reality was undeniable. He drove there with a loaded gun, forced his way inside, and executed a woman who had done everything she could to survive him. By dawn, prosecutors had already begun drafting charges. The district attorney's office moved swiftly, issuing a warrant for first-degree premeditated murder, as defined under Tennessee Code Section 39-13-202, a charge reserved for intentional killings planned in advance, carrying a potential sentence of life imprisonment with or without parole. They also added aggravated burglary, given the forced entry into Michaela's home, and violation of an order of protection, which in this case was not just a misdemeanor, but a piece of evidence demonstrating a pattern of escalating danger. In Tennessee, first-degree murder requires proof of premeditation, something prosecutors can establish through actions taken before the killing. Bringing a weapon, lying in wait, stalking, or making prior threats. Michaela's case had all of that. Her recorded statements, her 911 calls, her visible fear, the texts she sent friends, the past incidents involving the gun. It all formed a timeline that prosecutors would use to show this wasn't a moment of anger. It was a choice. When Michaela's family learned of the charges, the room fell silent. Not because they felt relief. There is no relief in losing a daughter, a sister, a mother, but because the words first-degree murder made everything real in a way they weren't ready for. In the days that followed, news of Michaela's death spread quickly across Nashville. Her photograph, warm smile, bright eyes, appeared on local broadcasts. Reporters recounted the details. The restraining order, the unanswered pleas for help, the system failures that preceded her murder. Domestic violence organizations began speaking out. Advocates called for accountability. And across social media, a painful refrain began to circulate. She did everything right. Why wasn't it enough? Vigils were held. Friends gathered with candles, sharing stories about Michaela. The way she laughed, the way she loved her kids, the way she always tried to see the good even when life made it difficult. One friend said, she wasn't just trying to survive for herself. She was trying to build a future her kids could be proud of. Another whispered, she kept saying she felt like she was running out of time. Her mother stood before the crowd, her voice trembling but steady. "My daughter asked for help," she said. "She trusted the system, and the system failed her." In domestic violence circles, those words rang with haunting familiarity. Studies show that nearly half of domestic violence homicides involve victims who previously sought help from police or courts. Many had restraining orders. Many reported violations. Many were told to wait and see. And many ended up like Michaela, killed despite doing everything survivors are instructed to do. The autopsy report arrived days later. It outlined the medical realities of Michaela's death in sterile, clinical language: multiple gunshot wounds, significant internal hemorrhaging, injuries consistent with close-range fire. But behind those phrases, behind the science and the measurements, was the horrifying truth of her final moments. For investigators, the report strengthened their case. For her family, it reopened wounds that had barely begun to close. As court proceedings began, the estranged husband appeared before a judge via video. A muted image on a screen, his face blank as charges were read aloud. No emotion, no reaction, no acknowledgement of the devastation he caused. The judge denied bond, citing the violent nature of the crime, his history of threats, and the violation of the protective order. In the weeks that followed, prosecutors assembled their case. They organized digital evidence, gathered witness statements, reviewed Michaela's phone records, listened to her 911 calls. Those calls, captured in real time, carried a level of raw, terrified truth that would be impossible for a jury to ignore. In one, her voice trembles so intensely it fractures mid-sentence. In another, the dispatcher asks if she feels in immediate danger, and Michaela answers quietly, "Yes, I think he's going to kill me." Her words, preserved forever, became the backbone of the prosecution's narrative. But beyond the legal strategy, beyond the courtroom, something deeper was happening. Michaela's story became a catalyst. Her case forced uncomfortable questions into public conversation. Why wasn't the gun confiscated after she reported it? Why weren't violations of the protection order taken seriously? Why did officers minimize her fear? And how many more women were living inside the same cycle right now? Terrified, unheard, unprotected? Advocates demanded reform. Community leaders spoke out. Some called for mandatory review of domestic violence cases involving firearms. Others pushed for improved training for officers responding to intimidation and stalking behaviors. Several argued that protection orders must come with automatic gun removal, not optional, not delayed, but immediate. Through it all, Michaela's name became a symbol of a systemic failure too common to ignore. Her story resonated because it revealed a truth no victim should ever have to face. The danger doesn't end when you call for help. It doesn't end when you leave. And it doesn't end when the court hands you a piece of paper promising protection. It ends only when the threats are taken seriously. It ends when the laws designed to protect are actually enforced. It ends when the voices of victims are believed the first time, not the last. The final moments of this story don't bring comfort. There's no happy ending in cases like Michaela's. Only the hope that her death sparks change, that her warnings echo loudly enough to save someone else. At her memorial service, a pastor read her favorite verse, the one she used to write in notebooks and text to friends during difficult days. "God is within her. She will not fall." The crowd whispered it back softly, even as their hearts broke at the irony. That Michaela didn't fall because she was weak. She fell because the system built to protect her never stood with her. As candles flickered in the evening wind, her mother held one of Michaela's children close and whispered, "Your mommy tried. She fought so hard. She deserved so much more." And that is the truth that lingers long after the final chapter closes. The truth that demands we remember her name, her fear, her courage. Michaela Carter did everything right. The system did everything wrong. And because of that, a vibrant young mother lost her life to a man she tried desperately to escape. A man who never should have had a gun, never should have been free to approach her, and never should have been underestimated. Her story is not just a tragedy. It is a warning. It is a reckoning. It is a call for justice that must not be ignored. Before we go, If Michaela's story moved you, please consider subscribing to Cold Case Chronicles, True Crime, and hit the bell so you don't miss future episodes. If this episode mattered to you, like and share it. Help her story reach others who need to hear it. Leave a comment below. We read them, and your voices help keep these conversations alive. If you can, check the description for verified sources, links to domestic violence resources, and ways to support the channel. If you or someone you know is in immediate danger, call 911 now. If you're experiencing domestic violence and need confidential help in the United States, contact the National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-7233 or visit their website for live chat and local resources. You are not alone.